Lewis Hamilton has made a radical suggestion that he argues would prevent domination by a single team in Formula 1. His idea is simple: don't allow teams to start work on next year's car until a set date. He suggested August the 1st. It's an intriguing idea, one that has merits and pitfalls, so we couldn't resist taking a deeper look at Hamilton's theory. You can understand anyone who has been on the wrong side of Red Bull's domination over the past couple of years coming up with such a proposal. Although it's a bit awkward that Hamilton didn't think of such a change while he had the dominant car in F1. But if his idea became reality, it could actually make life more difficult for Mercedes. Hamilton initially floated the idea in an interview with Sky Sports F1 in Austria. When asked about the chances of catching Red Bull, he said Mercedes would slowly catch up, but that Red Bull are probably already focusing on the 2024 car because they are so far ahead. He then suggested that the FIA should set a time when a team is allowed to start developing the following year's car, perhaps August the 1st. He also mentioned October as a possibility, although conceded this would be too late. This rule change, he suggested, would prevent a team in Red Bull's position being able to move further ahead. He later said this would mean no one has a head start and it's a real race between the teams to get their new cars developed. The existence of the cost cap also feeds into this idea. Hamilton suggested that when you're as far ahead as Red Bull is, you can spend this year's money on next year's car. Hamilton didn't outline exactly how this ban on starting work on next year's car would work, for example, whether it would only apply to aerodynamic design work or all aspects of the car. It's also worth noting that this was very much his own idea rather than something the Mercedes team asked him to put out there for public debate. But it's all about the basic principle of trying to ensure that one team is not able to dominate. Inevitably, shortly after Hamilton had first suggested the idea, championship leader Max Verstappen was asked about it in a press conference. He hadn't heard the suggestion directly, but was told Hamilton said it was unfair given how far Red Bull is ahead that it's already started work on next year's car. Understandably, Verstappen gave the idea short shrift. Life is unfair, he said. And he later said what a lot of people were thinking, pointing out that Hamilton wasn't arguing for this when in a dominant position with Mercedes for all those years. Verstappen has a point. Given Hamilton won 6 championships between 2014 and 2020 during the Mercedes supremacy, you could argue this is a little hypocritical. Hamilton did at least address that, although his later claim that his suggestion wasn't aimed at one particular person didn't hold up, given it was framed specifically around Verstappen's massive points lead. He was the first to accept that he had benefited from being in that situation previously. He said he was fortunate to have one of those periods Max is having right now, and added his suggestion was based on his personal experience of Mercedes being able to start on its new car early during those years to preserve its dominance. Again though, if he felt that way at the time, he certainly kept those feelings to himself. He also cited cases such as Brawn, the team that became Mercedes, sinking most of its 2008 development budget as Honda into the 2009 car that won both championships. Hamilton's argument is that it shouldn't be possible to steal a march on rivals like that. It's reasonable to question Hamilton's motivations in floating this idea, and there's no way he would have suggested it were he still in Verstappen's position. But regardless of who it is, most would agree with his argument that F1 doesn't want to have huge bands of time with one car ahead, and F1 always needs better racing. The question is whether Hamilton's idea is workable and would it achieve what he's suggesting. Hamilton didn't offer up a full draft of his regulations, so we can only speculate on how such a development ban would work. This idea isn't unprecedented. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit in 2020, one of the rule changes hastily conceived to deal with the economic impact was a temporary ban on aerodynamic development for the reintroduction of ground effect cars in 2022 that ran from late March to the end of December. Remember, that rule change was originally scheduled for 2021 but was also delayed for pandemic reasons. This development ban enshrined 2 rules within the sporting regulations, stating that wind tunnel testing and CFD simulations could only be carried out with models or geometries that substantially complied with the 2020 or 21 technical regulations. So why not do the same again? Well, that was a unique situation and dealt with arguably the biggest change in car regulations in F1 history. There was a clear distinction between the 20 and 21 cars and the 22 project, so it wasn't too difficult to police. Things are very different now. That means the idea of preventing even wind tunnel and CFD testing that applies clearly to a car for the following year is a tenuous one, let alone if you wanted to extend it to design and R&D work. It's possible to monitor it, but where do you draw the line? In most years, the step from year to year is evolutionary. Red Bull's philosophy is usually to stick with the concept it has hit on and keep wringing out more performance. Most teams will do the same, as while Mercedes and Ferrari will have bigger changes in mind for 2024, Aston Martin has repeatedly stated that its current car, which effectively started with the introduction of a major upgrade package in May 2022, is the basis all the way through to the end of this rules cycle in 2025. But there's not only the problem of delineating one year from another, given there's so much relevant carryover in design and knowledge. And what about long lead time components such as monocoques? These take months to make with lengthy spells in autoclaves. If you couldn't even start a monocoque design until August, that's a big problem, and there are many such components. There's also the question of policing. The FIA keeps a very close track of what's going on in the wind tunnel and in CFD thanks to the ATR that limits your aero testing time in line with championship position, so that could be extended. If you could successfully differentiate between this year and next year, you could therefore police it. The trouble is you can't. And what of long-term planning? Every team will already have at least someone doing preliminary work on the major rule changes for 2026. So is that also outlawed? And even if you can police wind tunnel and CFD work, how do you stop someone thinking, as Red Bull team principal Christian Horner pointed out? So as you can see, there are plenty of holes in this idea. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a no-go, but particularly when it comes to drawing the line between what is this year and next year design-wise, it seems unworkable. And in fairness to Hamilton, it's not like he arrived in Austria with a manifesto for how this should all work. There's every chance it was just an off-the-cuff remark as the thought came into his head in the middle of an interview. So while he shared his idea, he's not obliged to have fully worked out the practicalities. While this kind of rule isn't going to appear overnight, so this is purely a hypothetical, there's no guarantee a rule like this would even help a team in the position of Mercedes. Team principal Toto Wolff has already said there will be significant architectural changes next year, potentially to the rear suspension and to change the cockpit position that Hamilton has criticised. So for a team needing to do that, the late start would be a disadvantage. It's already working on next year's car and needs to if it's to get on terms with Red Bull, so for a team in Mercedes' position, Hamilton's suggestion would potentially hold it back. What's more, you can also argue it would help a dominant team. Yes, right now Red Bull can switch focus to next year's car early, but if you make everyone leave it late, Red Bull's starting from a higher level with less time for others to make breakthroughs. F1 already has the ATR regulations and the cost cap that's designed to reduce the chances of having a big advantage, and the hope is that over time those rules will close things up. But the best team will likely still be the best team, even with an extra limitation on design time. And restricting how long everyone can spend developing their new cars could further lock in the status quo rather than increase the chances of mixing things up.